Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Jeffrey Toobin with us today. We'll chat with Jeffrey in just a moment. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So let's get right into the big thing of the week. Let's talk about Iran. We have a deal. I'm sorry, it's actually a memo of understanding, more commonly known as an MOU. But before we get to the MOU, let's just set the table here for a second. February 28th, we went in and invaded Iran. We didn't ask for Congress's approval. We didn't go to the United Nations. Donald Trump just decided he's going in, and it's probably going to be just like Venezuela, go in and get out real quick. That's not what happened. So we have like 3 months plus of war in Iraq. We were told that there was an imminent threat, a nuclear threat, and then that turned out to be bullshit. And then when he was there, he had no idea what he was doing, and for the last 3+ months, he's had no idea how to get out. Until very recently, which is basically him saying, I'm done, I'm tired, I'm bored. And so he's decided that he's going to do this deal with Iran. Well, let's just play this clip.
We're going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground.
Oh, wait, that was old Trump. This is new Trump.
I'm saying that if other countries have them, it's a little bit unfair for them not to have some.
What? Now the United States president who got us into this quagmire, who promised no nukes in Iran, who gave that as the entire reason for being there, is now arguing on their behalf that it would be unfair. Let me repeat that. Unfair for them not to have ballistic missiles. That is just insane.
I mean, this was not just bad. This is really one of the worst strategic blunders in modern American history. It's not an overstatement to say that, because what we know now is that he has not only set up Israel to be completely left out there, but he's also put incredible stress on the next presidents, whoever they may be, because they're going to have to clean up this mess.
Yeah. So this deal, it took days for Trump to release the details, which, by the way, is very telling, right? Because Donald Trump is the biggest braggart in the history of bragging. So if he thinks something's really good, he's going to tell you about it the nanosecond he does it. And then he's going to tell you over and over and over again. He doesn't stretch things out for 4 days if it's really good. So we're going to be lifting sanctions on Iran's oil exports, which the experts are estimating will bring in $150 billion. Trump has unfrozen assets, $25 billion, versus $1.7 billion that Donald Trump has been railing about for years, how Obama gave them all this cash. Obama, $1.7 billion, Trump, $25 billion. But here's the thing that drives me crazy, is this $300 billion reconstruction fund that's not going to come from the United States. J.D. Vance, they're all like, it's not going to be American money. It doesn't matter. If you truly believe that Iran is our enemy, that for 47 years they've been vowing to destroy America, that they have killed Americans, they have killed our soldiers, that they are building nuclear weapons that we can't allow them to build, that they are the biggest and most deadly state sponsor of terrorism. If you truly believe all of that, you should be stopping anyone from giving them money, right? Think about this. $300 billion, another billions in the lifting of sanctions, the unfreezing of assets. We're talking about $500 billion that are going to be used for more enriched uranium, for more centrifuges, drums to support Hezbollah and Hamas. This is going to be used to do all the things you just told us you had to go to war over, because for 47 years they're trying to destroy us. And the Obama deal, There was a 98% reduction in the uranium stockpile. Here, not even part of the agreement.
And they had to ship it out.
Yeah. Enriched uranium. Their enriched uranium program was capped at 3.7 with Obama's deal. 60% here. And no mention in this current agreement. But he opened the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, I mean,
Which is...
that's the art of the deal. That's the art of the deal right there.
First I closed it. Then I opened it.
Brilliant.
No other president has done that.
He's
No other president has closed the Strait of Hormuz and then opened it. It's another example of this motherfucker being the arsonist who then puts out his own fire and goes, I'm the hero. I put out the fire.
Except that he hasn't really put this fire out yet.
Under Obama, the cost was just diplomacy. That was the expense. Here, $100 billion in fighting this war.
Oh, it's
And that's a conservative
beyond conservative.
calculation. Other costs, 13 soldiers' lives, 543 injuries, the skyrocketing of oil, gas, and energy costs, which is just pummeling the American consumer. And then there's like, oh, but they promised they won't build the nukes. Well, where have we heard that before? In Obama's deal and everywhere else over the last 40 years. I mean, this is an empty promise, right? Like, that's not new. That's not new that they're saying they won't build nukes. This is such capitulation. This is the biggest loss from a military standpoint, from a diplomatic standpoint. This is utter embarrassment for the United States of America. Here's the thing about Trump, and you mentioned Israel before, Maddie. I want to just speak to my fellow Jews for a moment. You know who you are. You single-issue voters, you guys who voted for Trump, knowing what a monster he was everywhere else. But as long as you thought he was a true friend to Israel and Jews, you're okay with it. Okay. I've had debates with a lot of folks before the election about this issue. I and so many other people tried to warn you that he's no friend of Israel. He's no friend of the Jews. And we are seeing that right before our eyes this week. J.D. Vance. What did J.D. Vance say yesterday? He's literally threatening Israel. Either you stop doing what you think is the defense of your country. Stop, or you will lose your greatest ally. How do you feel about that, my fellow Hebes?
Or only ally.
Only is true, too.
Yes.
He
I think that's actually, yes.
I think
good
he
catch.
said only.
He did say only ally.
The only.
He fucking threatened Israel. And let's make something clear. J.D. Vance has no foreign policy. He does what Donald Trump tells him to do. Okay? Netanyahu's cabinet has criticized Donald Trump over this Iran deal. And what does the little man baby do? He pouts, stomps his feet, and says, okay, well then fuck you, Israel. Trump to Israel, drop dead. So that's why we're ending the war in Iran. Not because we freed the Iranian people and created a framework for them to go out in the streets and protest and take back their country, which is what he said in the first couple of days. Not because we've gotten rid of their nuke program. Not because there's been regime change. We actually have an angrier, younger, healthier Ayatollah now than we had before. And Iran is stronger than it's ever been. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 60 days, but I can guarantee you that there will be virtually nothing for America in any ultimate deal that gets signed, and everything for Iran.
Yeah, the new poll that just came out, 72 or 73% of Israelis now don't trust Trump, which is like amazing. This just came out. Well, the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that Trump doesn't believe in any contracts. He breaks them as soon as he writes them, if they're even written.
Loyalty to anyone.
So I don't, we can't really believe that in 60 days or within less than 12 days or 12 seconds, this thing doesn't fall apart.
There's no mission. There's no clear plan. There's no goal. It's nothing. It's just the ego and the whims of one very disturbed man. That changed from hour to hour. It's terrifying. But I do want to say for the record, as a Jew, as a Zionist, as someone who has a deep love and appreciation for the state of Israel and a desire to see it thrive and to be safe, I can't stand Bibi Netanyahu. And it pains me that he is leading that country. It pains me what he has done to the standing of Israel on the world stage in the years following October 7th. And like Trump, Netanyahu is another self-serving sociopath who is loyal to nobody but himself and who has used this war to stay out of prison. And so he, to your point, he doesn't give a fuck about Trump.
No.
He used Trump. He's Geppetto to Trump's Pinocchio. Mm-hmm. He's just pulling them strings. He literally is going to continue to do whatever he thinks he needs to do. This war is his Epstein cover-up. Mm-hmm. Okay? It's just another reason why Trump is in this quagmire. He can't control Iran. He can't control Israel. He's starting not to be able to even control some of his Republican Congress people who are getting very frustrated with him because they know what's coming in November. It's an absolute total mess with no end in sight.
Absolutely not. The memorandum of understanding is worthless.
Yeah. Oh, I do want to say one other thing. This is important because I do try to keep the Epstein thing alive because everybody seems to forget about the fact that a lot of women were abused as children, as teenagers, that there were a lot of promises made by this president and his administration to bring the pedophiles to justice. I mean, we're talking about sex trafficking here of underage girls and also the sexual abuse of some women as well. There's this thing called the Epstein files. I don't know if you've heard of it, but in these files, Donald Trump is mentioned 40,000 times. There's even someone in those files that accused him of raping her when she was 13 years old. It's all in these files. These files, which, get this, Congress passed a law, which Trump himself signed under duress, that forced the Department of Justice to release all of the Epstein files. And guess what? Only half of those 6 million files have been released. So the Department of Justice is literally breaking the law right now since December when this law was passed. But this week, Representative Jamie Raskin, who's the ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, he's asked Bard College for extensive records relating to Epstein's relationship to the college and its outgoing president, Leon Botstein, saying the school's recent investigation was, quote, problematic, quote, incomplete, and left key questions unanswered. And he wants Botstein to testify because there should be people that are held accountable on any level for what they may or may not have done to aid and abet this monster Jeffrey Epstein. And so Botstein is just a little tiny speck on this elephant's ass. There are people that still need to testify. People like acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, the bankers who supported and funded Jeffrey Epstein, others who are named in the Epstein files. How about Donald Trump himself? So let's not forget, there's a lot of shit going on in this world, in Iran, here, there, everywhere. We can't forget this Epstein cover-up because that's what it is. All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
I just wanted to say thank you. We shouldn't forget. It should be in the vernacular, and that's well said, Andy. My winner, Iran, who can't seem to do anything but win with its negotiations with the U.S. government. My loser, Russia, who received huge scorched earth missile attacks by Ukraine on its oil refineries.
My winner this week is Emmanuel Macron for apparently telling Trump, quote, this is not the octagon at this week's G7 conference. My loser is Bibi Netanyahu, who never heeded Rick Wilson's warning that everything Trump touches dies. And he's now finding out the hard way that he's not the exception.
All right, I got two winners and a loser. My first winner is soccer icon Lionel Messi, who at 38 became the oldest player in history to score a hat trick, 3 goals, and who tied at 16 the most men's World Cup goals in Argentina's 3-0 win over Algeria Tuesday night. My other winner, Georgia's Republican state legislature, which told Governor Brian Kemp they were killing his plan to rig the state's voting maps for the 2028 election. My loser, Donald Trump, who is giving everything and getting nothing, and who is committing, as Republican Senator Bill Cassidy said, a, quote, tremendous foreign policy blunder. And that gets us to the weekly rant. So I want to continue talking to my MAGA friends for a moment. It's a year and a half into Trump's second term. Are you guys ready yet to admit that he's a complete and colossal failure? That he has reneged on virtually every single major campaign promise he made to you? That by his words and actions, such as he doesn't care about Americans' economic struggles, or that he loves inflation, and affordability is a Democrat hoax, that he is not one of you, and instead is an out-of-touch, tone-deaf elitist who truly couldn't give a flying fuck about you or your problems. Trump promised to focus like a laser on the economy, to bring down inflation, grocery prices, the cost of healthcare and housing. And instead, he has flown all over the world, cosplaying international strongman while selling America out to its arch enemies like China, Russia, and now Iran. He promised an America First policy founded on no more wars. Yet here we are, a year later, mired in a quagmire, thousands of miles away in Iran, with no end in sight, despite his memo of understanding, which you can wipe your ass with after your next dookie. On immigration, his signature issue, he promised mass deportations of, quote, the worst of the worst, but instead targeted good, decent people. Mothers, fathers, landscapers, nannies, teachers, and other productive tax-paying workers, and ended up having American citizens shot in the face and head simply for exercising their First Amendment rights of free speech and the right to assemble. So yeah, I suspect many of you are feeling a bit betrayed and maybe even heartbroken right now, and maybe feeling buyer's remorse. But you know what? All of that is okay. And I can't speak for others, but I'm not going to hold that against you. We are all flawed. We all make mistakes. But what matters more is what we do to fix those mistakes. And you have an opportunity this November to punish those who lied to you, who lied to all of us, who promised to make America great again. And all they did was fuck things up like never before. That includes Trump and the Republican cowards in Congress who continue to protect and enable this incompetent, corrupt, self-serving loser. They are as complicit as he is. And you can fire them all this fall. You can give Democrats a chance to control the House and the Senate. And if they don't deliver for you the way I know they can and will, then you can fire them too in 2 years. That's called democracy and accountability. And it's time we hold Donald Trump and the Republican Party accountable. All right, let's get to Jeffrey Toobin. He is a legal journalist who last year joined the New York Times as a contributing opinion writer. He also writes for the New York Times Magazine and continues to offer commentary on CNN. In 2024, NBC Universal released Homegrown OKC, a podcast based on his book, Homegrown, Timothy McVeigh and the Rise of Right-Wing Extremism. He's a noted lecturer and an instructor at Harvard Law School. He previously served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Brooklyn. His work has been the basis for major television events, including the acclaimed 10-part limited series American Crime Story, based on his book, The Run of His Life, The People vs. O.J. Simpson. His other best-selling books include The Oath, The Obama White House and the Supreme Court, The Nine, Inside the Secret World of the Supreme Court, Too Close to Call, the 36-day battle to decide the 2000 election, American Heiress, the Wild Saga of the Kidnapping, Crimes and Trial of Patty Hearst, True Crimes and Misdemeanors, the investigation of Donald Trump, and last year's The Pardon, the politics of presidential mercy. Jeffrey, welcome into the back room.
Hi, Andy. Good to be here.
Great to have you here. I'm a big fan of you and your work, and looking forward to chatting with you. So, when historians look back on Trump's second term? Will they see a president who aggressively tested constitutional limits, or one who succeeded in fundamentally and perhaps even dangerously expanded presidential power?
To quote Zhou Enlai on the French Revolution, it's too soon to tell. I just, that obviously is going to be a big subject that we think about when we think about, especially the second term of Donald Trump. The story is not yet written. It's hard to believe, but he's only a little more than a year and a half into a 4-year term. So there's a lot more to be determined, both in terms of what he tries to do, whether Congress begins to cut back on his powers at all, especially, after the midterms, however those turn out to be, what the Supreme Court does on issues like birthright citizenship. He certainly tried to expand the powers of the presidency, and I don't think there's any way all of them will be rolled back. I mean, I think he has definitely expanded them, but the magnitude of his success, I think, is still up for grabs.
Yeah, and that's a terrifying thought, because when you think about those first 18 months and what we've all been through, and then you stop and you say to yourself, there's 2.5 years left. Perspective and context is very important here.
It's completely astonishing to think about the fact that there are 2.5 years left, but I know how to count to 4, and we're not even halfway there yet.
Well, the good thing, I always tell myself, the good thing about getting older is that the time really flies. So that's me. That's me trying to be glass half full.
Right. I guess so. All right, I'll sign up for that.
Yeah, concede me that. So you've spent your career studying the presidency and the courts. What's the strongest case that Trump has moved the country towards a more authoritarian model of government? And what's the strongest argument against that claim?
Well, I think my initial reaction is two things. One is he has operated in an environment with a completely supine Congress. The system is designed so that the three branches of government operate as something like a check on each other. And there has been absolutely no check from Congress during this first year and a half. And, when you think about the fundamental power of the purse, which is basically Congress's most important power under our Constitution, which is deciding how the government spends its money, from the very beginning of this second term, starting most importantly with the Elon Musk Doge operation, Trump has basically said, I'm going to decide whether and when to spend the government's money, not Congress. That has been checked a little bit by the courts, but not much, and Congress has done nothing about it. So I think that's one area where there's just been a big change. The other area is in the operation of the Justice Department. The use of the Justice Department as a tool to attack and even prosecute the president's political enemies is something that's really unprecedented in modern American history. When I've written about Watergate, I've studied Watergate. When you look at what Nixon did, or at least even just talked about doing, in terms of using the FBI, the CIA, the IRS against his adversaries, it's nothing compared to what Trump has done. And I guess I also identify with this issue a little bit as someone who worked in the Justice Department. I was an assistant U.S. attorney, a very low-level figure in the scheme of things. I mean, I was just a line assistant in Brooklyn. But, I absorbed a culture and a set of values that said, we are not part of politics. I was hired during the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, which had no relevance to me. We were told that we operate in as apolitical a way as possible, and that is completely gone. And we've had this mass departures from the Justice Department of people who refuse to operate this way, and how and whether that gets corrected is a huge issue. And just to answer your question, a big change in the power of the presidency.
And is there an argument to be made against his autocratic overreach being truly effective on a long-term basis? When you look at the losses that continue to mount in the lower courts and on some level even in the Supreme Court, tariffs, for example, you look at his approval, you look at the pushback he's starting to get in Congress. Is there an argument to be made that, yeah, he's chaotic, there is autocratic overreach, but democracy is still holding? He is not succeeding the way he would love to, and the way maybe most of us feared 18 months ago.
Well, again, I don't know the answer to that question. There certainly has been some pushback, at least from the courts, and basically only from the courts, and not from Congress. Now, if Democrats retake one or both houses of Congress, that could change. But for the time being, there has been absolutely no pushback from Congress. And when you look at the way he has canceled projects on clean energy, you look at the way, the case against Jim Comey is still pending, and the prosecution of Don Lemon and the other journalists in Minnesota is still pending. Yes, there has been some pushback, but the changes have been really profound. And when you look at the number of people who have simply left government because of it, the simple election of a new president or a new Congress, it's going to take an enormous undertaking to reverse what's going on. And so yes, there's been some pushback, but it's not enough.
One controversy that's generated enormous debate is his $1.776 billion slush fund. Todd Blanche, acting and perhaps soon to be Attorney General, has said it's dead. Do you believe this is dead? And is such a fund even legal, especially as you were mentioning before about how appropriations are done in this country?
I think the fund in its current in its announced form is dead. It will not operate as it existed. It was meant to exist under the supposed settlement of Trump's lawsuit against the IRS. However, the issue of giving government money to Trump's supporters, especially the January 6th protesters and rioters whom he pardoned, that issue is not dead at all. And Trump is going to continue to try to use government money as a slush fund. It won't take that form. There's a very boring law called the Federal Tort Claims Act, which operates to when the government gets sued, when someone trips and falls in a post office, the government gets sued, and the Federal Tort Claims Act governs how the government handles those lawsuits. That, it seems, is going to be used as the vehicle for the January 6 rioters, for other people who feel they were aggrieved under an earlier administration, to sue and get money. And remember, it will be up to the Justice Department to how to settle those cases. So that will take place outside of the control of Congress, because there is this fund that exists to compensate the people who trip and fall in post offices. And that money, which was going to get the $1.8 billion for explicitly for the January 6 people, that can still be used, though not perhaps that much money, for the same kind of people making the same kinds of claims.
Mm-hmm. And sticking with the subject of presidential power, he's literally trying to rewrite the Constitution with birthright citizenship, which is one of the most consequential pending cases at the Supreme Court. What ruling are you expecting and why?
I think Trump is going to lose on birthright citizenship. I'm a lawyer. I was trained as a lawyer, and sometimes we, insist that we have magical powers to understand words that ordinary mortals don't. But the 14th Amendment says people born in the United States.
Pretty clear.
And you know what? Born is not a complicated word. Born means born. And there is this clause subject to the jurisdiction thereof that is of no relevance when it comes to the kind of way Trump is trying to do it. And I think it's just, this has been settled law for literally 100 years. The Supreme Court addressed this issue in a case in the 1890s, so not more than 100 years. And I just don't think that the justices are interested in opening up this particular can of worms when the Constitution speaks so clearly on it, not least because of the chaos it would unleash if we suddenly decided all these people who had been citizens their whole lives were not citizens. In addition to the sheer cruelty of that, it would be chaos, and also this Supreme Court, the conservative majority, calls itself textualist. They're very interested in the text of the Constitution, and the text of the Constitution says "born." It's not a term like due process or equal protection that can be subject to, many different definitions. Born means born, and people born in the United States are citizens. That's always the way it's been in this country, and I expect that's the way it'll remain.
Mm-hmm. They also believe in federalism until they don't,
Right.
So,
federalism and executive power. Mm-hmm. When Bill Clinton, Joe Biden wants to use his executive power to help people with student loans, no, that's an overstatement. When he wants to enforce pollution laws, that's an overstatement. But when Trump wants to do things, or Republican presidents want to do things, that's okay. So I have a good deal of cynicism about how the Constitution gets interpreted.
So you don't think, given this crazy upside-down world we're living in right now, that the strict constructionists might deconstruct?
No, I don't. I mean, God knows I've been wrong before in predictions about the Supreme Court. But just like the tariff case, mm-hmm. Some laws are so clear mm-hmm. That the justices have a certain degree of self-respect, or at least I would say a fair majority of them do, that they are not complete rubber stamps for the president. So I don't think Trump is going to win every case in the Supreme Court, but he's going to win a lot of them.
What else is pending at the Supreme Court that we should be extremely concerned about?
I actually think that's the biggest case. I think the case that we should be most concerned about has already been decided, and that's the Calais case about the Voting Rights Act. I think we've only begun to see the implications of that for how political power is allocated in this country. Almost all the attention, understandably, has been on whether states are going to redistrict congressional lines before the 2026 elections, the way Texas has done, the way Florida has done, and Democrats have done in response. But that's just the beginning. Remember, these states have to draw state legislature lines as well. Their state senates, their state houses, all those seats are going to be redrawn. A lot of local state judges are elected by district. Those districts are going to change. So we are going to see a level of partisanship in our state legislatures that is so different, and a transformation of Black and other minority representation that is going to go down so substantially that we're just beginning to see the implications of that. And the Supreme Court has given a total green light to that and invalidated, in effect, the entire Voting Rights Act, which, is widely described, including by me, as the most important civil rights law in the history of this country.
Yeah. Are you encouraged at all by what happened in Georgia in the state legislature, where they rejected Governor Brian Kemp's request to redistrict for 2028? Or do you think, like the slush fund, that's just going to rear its ugly head at some other point?
I think it's going to vary by state. It's going to vary a little bit, depending on the personalities involved. Mm-hmm. But if you look at just the overall pattern, it's not. It's going to change, and the Democrats, understandably, are going to respond, which also will make things worse. I don't want to. Well, it'll make things better for Democrats and perhaps better for the values I care about. But the idea that we don't have competitive elections for legislatures of any kind is not a healthy thing for this country, because the people who get elected in competitive districts are the people who can make compromises and pass laws. One reason Congress is so dysfunctional is that there are so few competitive districts, and fewer all the time, which means that all these candidates, the only thing they have to worry about are primaries. Their general elections are foregone conclusions, which means they have no incentive to cooperate with the other party. So that's really the big implication of what's happening, as well as the loss of minority representation.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is voters should be choosing their candidates, not the other way around, right?
Right. And it's interesting how much technology has played into this. I'm reviewing a biography of Samuel Alito. And Samuel Alito's father was a civil servant in New Jersey, and one of his jobs was to draw the district lines so that there were equal numbers of people in each district for state and local races. And he would sit there with an adding machine and try to equal things out. But it was pretty primitive, and he was also a civil servant. He was not a partisan. Now there are software programs that allow map makers to draw these lines with incredible precision, so that it's all Democrats or all Republicans, and that is just because it's easy to do. I mean, in back in the 50s and 60s, when Alito's father was doing it, technology didn't even exist, even if you were inclined to do it. So it's just an example of how things change.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about the Supreme Court's immunity decision, and I know this is kind of just personal speculation, but it is perhaps the most consequential decision, or at least
you mean Trump v. United States?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
One of the most, or at least one of the most consequential decisions in SCOTUS history. Do you think they understood at the time how consequential it was? Do you think they underestimated what would come after?
Yes, I do. Well, let me put it this way. I think Roberts did. I can't speak for all 9 of them, but I know Roberts well enough to think that what he thought he was doing was protecting all presidents, and particularly Joe Biden. I think he felt like what I am doing is putting this whole subject off limits, and I am not going to allow tit-for-tat prosecutions of departing presidents as they leave office. I think he made a classic Republican mistake of this era, which is false equivalency, which is there is nothing to prosecute Joe Biden for. And so he was not at risk for being prosecuted. Whereas Donald Trump tried to overturn an election on January 6th in a way that I think was clearly criminal. And he dealt with classified information in a way that was clearly criminal. And I think Roberts saw this as sort of a gift to the presidency, when in fact it was really a gift to just one president, Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. I know Roberts somewhat. I've studied him a lot over the years. I don't, pretend to understand the dark nights of his soul to the extent he has any, but I think he would be surprised at how this decision has been greeted, because he thought it was more about the presidency than one president in particular.
Mm. Well, several of the justices, they embraced versions of the so-called unitary executive theory. But I think what we're talking about is, at what point does a strong executive become an unchecked executive? I mean, I think we're seeing that right now, and that's really dangerous.
Well, absolutely. And I think this is going to come up a lot in Todd Blanche's confirmation hearings, because there had been a custom and strict rules in place ever since Watergate that the president stays out of individual prosecutorial decisions when it comes to the Justice Department, that he doesn't call up the Attorney General and say, prosecute the following of my enemies. And when Trump and when Blanche has defended Trump, targeting Tish James and Comey and Adam Schiff, who has not yet been indicted, Blanche's response has been the unitary executive, which is, if you're in charge of the Justice Department, you're in charge of the Justice Department. And you can't carve out areas where where there is some sort of shared power, either within the executive branch and this is going to come up with these pending Supreme Court cases about whether he can fire a member of the Federal Trade Commission and whether he can fire a member of the Federal Reserve. The unitary executive people hate those independent agencies because they think they are some sort of weird hybrid that limits the unitary power of a president. And I think that it's going to be a good clue as to which direction the court is going to go. I suspect they are probably going to split the difference on that one out of sheerly practical concerns. They are going to say it's okay to fire the FTC because the FTC isn't very important. But if the president is in complete control of the Fed and can fire governors who don't push interest rates in the direction he wants, that would unstable financial markets. And John Roberts, I think, is enough of an institutionalist, and Amy Barrett probably is as well. They don't want that. Now, I think if you are being intellectually consistent, you should probably rule both cases the same way. But I think they will figure out a way to draw a distinction because of the effect on financial markets.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had Barb McQuaid on this week, and she had an interesting idea, although it would require a constitutional amendment, but to have like a fourth branch of government, which sort of is separate and it oversaw the judiciary. And, because we are now seeing what happens when a rogue president is in control of the DOJ and the FBI. They become his personal law firm and his personal security force. So it just seems like we have hit a point in our history where separating out the Justice Department, the FBI, and control over the law should be taken away from the executive branch. I just found that really
Well,
fascinating.
it's an interesting idea, and it runs counter to the way our law has been going for the last 20 or 30 years, which is towards more rigid divisions of power among the branches of government, and at least when Republicans are in office, more power for the president. So the idea that the FBI and the DOJ can do exactly what the president wants to exactly the people he wants it done to, that idea is in ascendance. Now, how you control that other than having better presidents and better people in charge of the FBI and DOJ, I'm not enough of a political scientist to have a good idea, but it's certainly been a big change.
Yeah, and just to play devil's advocate, so has the presidency changed in ways we've never seen it before. So it's like, desperate measures for desperate times kind of philosophy. It's just, the way we've done things for 250 years, clearly, like the founding fathers left a lot of room open for a rogue president.
Right, and just to go back to the voting rights decision and the court's is that, look, it's always been difficult to amend the Constitution, and frankly, I think it's a good thing that it's difficult to amend the Constitution. But now you have the state so polarized that you're never going to get 3/4 of them to agree on any sort of constitutional amendment, even if there starts to be something like a national consensus on the need to change the Constitution. There have been consequential constitutional amendments. Giving 18-year-olds the vote, that was a big deal, and that was in my lifetime. It was I think it was in the early 70s that it happened. The country and the Equal Rights Amendment came very close to being confirmed, to being ratified, in the same period. Now, I don't see any prospect for any sort of constitutional change.
No, I agree. We've seen Trump repeatedly attack not just the judicial system itself, but individual federal judges, calls them corrupt, says they're his enemies, simply for ruling against him. In other words, he could either win or he's been wronged and victimized by corrupt judges. How dangerous is this rhetoric? And what is, even more importantly, what does it do to erode the public's trust in the rule of law?
I got to say that this is one area where I'm less worried than other areas. I think there's been this sort of culture that judges and even the Supreme Court are beyond criticism. I don't know if you remember, when Obama was president, during one of his State of the Union addresses, he criticized the court's decision in Citizens United, the campaign finance case, and Samuel Alito was in the audience and shook his head and said, no. It's like, oh, how could Obama do that? That was so terrible. I was like, the courts and judges exercise enormous power in our country. They are the last word on, and I don't think they should be outside of criticism. And the fact that Trump criticizes judges and the Supreme Court, he expresses himself in crude ways that, are characteristic of how he expresses himself. When he says, after the tariff decision, he said, the families of the justices who voted against him should be ashamed. I think that's a crappy way to express yourself. But the idea that it's bad that he criticizes judges, I don't really have a problem with that. I think given the power they exercise, criticism is fine.
Yeah, in theory, you're right, but there's criticism and then there's criticism. He's not saying like, based on the law, I believe that these people made a bad... To your point, he's attacking the families. He's attacking their credibility. He's calling them corrupt. He is, like with the media, he calls them the enemy of the people. And then you have that case, I think it was New Jersey, where the judge's son was murdered.
The judge is murdered, yeah.
Yeah, some wacko comes to the house because he's all fired up. I'm not saying he was fired up in particular by Trump, but he was fired up. by something. And yeah, everyone should be criticized appropriately, but it just seems like he's turning at least a part of his base against the judicial system and judges, and therefore the rule of law, in the same way he's turned them against facts, reality, truth, and the media.
Yes, that's true, but you got to prioritize your outrage. And I guess criticism
I've got
of judges
too much outrage.
is, I know. Believe me, I certainly understand. But this is one area where I am happy to, not happy, but where I dial back my outrage.
So this isn't the hill you're going to die on.
No, I'm not going to die on
the
this
Trump hill.
particular hill. No. Well, the Trump hill, yes, but not this. I'm screwing up the metaphors here, but not this part of the Trump hill.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've written extensively about the Supreme Court, presidential power, and the rule of law. Here we are 18 months from his inauguration. Are you more optimistic or pessimistic today than you were then about the Constitution's ability to withstand a president like Trump, who is determined to, I guess, not only push its limits, but rewrite it and get rid of it if he could?
I'm more pessimistic than I was, but I am not existentially pessimistic. I think I think our government is in a worse place, both in terms of the things it's doing and in terms of its structure, than I expected it would be after a year and a half of his second term. Mm-hmm. You know, I think the way he has exercised power and the way Congress has allowed it and the courts have mostly allowed it, the way he expresses himself as a public figure, I think is damaging to the country and will be very hard to undo, even if there's a new Congress and later a new president. However, you know, I don't think we live in a fascist state. I don't think we live in a country where people can't express criticism of the president. So I don't want to, you know, I don't want to overstate how bad things are, but I do think they're worse. And I think they are, you know, it's going to be hard to turn this back, even if you have a change in party and personnel.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think people need to be able to just really look at things at face value. You could say, yes, things are ugly in this country. The Constitution is being tested. There's a lot of things that are happening, like to your point earlier, that we may never be able to put the genie back in the bottle. But if we were really living in a fascist state, the dictator's name wouldn't be taken down off a building. You know, like that shows us that the system still is working. And to a degree, he is respecting that system. He's trying like hell not to. But the dam seems to be holding.
I think you make a very important point that it's important to modulate your outrage. It's important to recognize that, you know, all is not lost, that the rule of law exists, but it's also important to realize that a lot of bad stuff has happened.
Yep.
And to keep those two ideas in mind, that things are bad, but they're not hopeless, it's not the easiest thing to do, but I think it's part of our job, at those of us who presume to speak about these issues, to try to maintain that distinction.
Absolutely. In our last few minutes, I want to talk about your book from last year, The Pardon, The Politics of Presidential Mercy. Help us understand why you think that pardon was so consequential from a historical standpoint, and how it may or may not relate to or have paved the way to some of the crazy pardons we've seen out of at least the last couple of presidents.
Well, you're talking about Gerald Ford's pardon of
Nixon,
Richard
yes.
Nixon. Yeah, which is mostly what my book is about. And, you know, I what interests me about pardons in general is that it's an anomaly in the Constitution, in that, as we've been discussing, at least the theory of the Constitution is that there are checks and balances. The pardon is an exception. There are no checks and balances. The courts can't impose a pardon. The courts can't stop a pardon. Same with Congress. It is entirely within the discretion of the president. And for that reason, pardons operate as a kind of X-ray into the souls of presidents. You learn a lot about presidents by whom they decide to pardon and whom they don't decide to pardon. And, the story of Gerald Ford, I think, is a story of a great miscalculation, that he thought after the trauma of Watergate, pardoning Richard Nixon would put Watergate behind us. And I, as a result of a lot of research, I think he really did believe that. And I think he really made the decision in good faith to pardon Richard Nixon. And Nixon, in his clever Machiavellian way, manipulated Ford to get the pardon he wanted. I think it was wrong. I think the pardon was wrong. I think it was politically disastrous for Ford, and it should have been disastrous for Ford. But I think he operated out of good faith in making that decision. I think if you look, the idea that pardons reveal presidents, that is a useful insight that carries forward, especially with Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump thought that the election of 2020 should be overturned. That's why he won't pardon the 1,500 rioters. He thought that was, as he often said, a day of love. He thought they did nothing wrong. That tells you a tremendous amount about Donald Trump. Also, if you look at his other pardons, the fact that they go to campaign contributors, to political supporters, he is a transactional guy. He is not someone who has any meaningful sense of morality. He gives, he gets, and he gives. And these people supported him either financially or politically. They get a pardon, regardless of how crooked and corrupt they are. That tells you a lot about Donald Trump. That's what I think makes pardons worth studying, because of how much they tell us about presidents.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people are speculating over whether he will pardon Ghislaine Maxwell, which I think from a political standpoint would be a disaster for him and the Republican Party, and really cheapen the pardon process. Not that I think it can get any lower than it already is.
It's pretty five and dime, to use an old expression now, but okay.
Yeah, but there is a bottom a new bottom when it involves like the rape of children. Like, to me, that's like, yeah, he's a sociopath, he's a corrupt mafia boss, but child abuse, child rape, that kind of thing, sex trafficking minors. It is a Rubicon crossing to me, although he's crossed so many, I don't think it matters anymore. But do you think he's going to do that?
I don't think he will do anything with Ghislaine Maxwell until after the next presidential election. I think in the lame duck period, when the new president has been elected, and the January 20th of 2029, I think all bets are off. I think she would be more likely to get a commutation than a pardon. Just a commutation lets someone out of prison, but they still have the conviction on their record. A pardon wipes out the conviction altogether. I think Maxwell would be more of a candidate for a commutation. But I agree that the one area where he does seem politically vulnerable, and even recognizes that he's politically vulnerable, is the whole Epstein story. And I don't think he wants to poke that bee's nest while he is still trying to exercise presidential power. But I do think he is going to pardon all the ICE people, all the people who were involved in the crackdown on immigrants. I think there are going to be enormous numbers of pardons of all the members of his administration that were, Stephen Miller and all the people who were involved in, what went on in Minnesota with the deaths of those two people. I think there are going to be a lot of pardons before the end of his second term, but I don't think Ghislaine Maxwell will be one of them.
A lot of people criticized Biden. He took it on the chin and still does for pardoning his whole family, for eternity, for whatever, for everything, all encompassing. But given the vengeful, retributive nature of Trump's second term and what he's doing at the DOJ and the FBI, can you blame him for what he did?
Yeah, you can blame him. I
can't
blame him. I can blame him.
Uh-huh.
I
How
think
so?
it was wrong. I think his son committed crimes. His son was found guilty in Delaware of a gun-related offense. He pleaded guilty to tax crimes in California, and I think he deserved to pay a price for that. If he didn't commit other crimes, then he would have been in a position to defend himself if he was charged later. So I think the pardon to Hunter and to the other Biden relatives, contributed to the cynicism that people have about government. That there is one set of rules for powerful people and the relatives of powerful people, and a different set of rules for everyone else. And yes, I understand the fear that Biden had that Hunter would be unduly pursued, but I think that was a risk that he had to take and Hunter had to take for the way he lived his life. And I think Biden did serious damage to his historical legacy by pardoning it, and his other relatives.
Last question. Given what we've been talking about, in particular with Biden and Trump, and the fact that the Constitution does grant very broad powers of the pardon to presidents, is it time for some kind of change, more limitations, more restrictions?
This is a great question, especially since I wrote a book that is mostly about bad pardons. I mean, I go through. It's mostly about Nixon and Ford, but there are, and my answer to that question is absolutely not. I think we should, even though there are a lot of bad pardons out there, we should keep the pardon power for this reason. There will always be political pressure on presidents of whatever party to be tough on crime, to be, not to release people from prison. And I remain of the belief that there are too many people in prison, and there will always be too many people in prison, and there should be some kind of safety valve. Barack Obama, in his second term, used the pardon power well, where he had a formal process called the Clemency Project, where he released or granted commutations, mostly, not pardons, to low-level drug offenders. I don't want to take that power away. So my solution to the problem is not getting rid of the pardon power, it's getting better presidents. And Andy, I'd like you to get to work on that right away.
I'm on it, man. I've been on it. Jeffrey, great
That's my view.
Great conversation. Appreciate your time, and do come back and chat with us again.
Terrific. Thanks, Andy.
All righty, take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langale. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.